wanted to give you a tour of Photopea. This is a online photo editing resource that you can use. It's free and it's easy to use. And you know what? It works a lot, almost identical to Photoshop. So if you already have Photoshop experience, this should work really well for you. And if you don't, well, this is a nice way to learn how to use Photoshop. Okay, so first off, just like in regular Photoshop, along the side here, you have these tools. These have to do with more specific things in your image. Along the top, you have things that affect your image in a more global way, like saving, adjusting the contrast and the curves and the color. And we'll talk about some of those in just a minute. Filters that you can play with, a lot of things to explore through here. You can also customize the way your window looks if you want to add things that deal with more specific things in the future. Along the side, these are more informational, so things like your history and working with layers. One of my favorite things, the navigator, which we'll talk about later in other videos. But to get started, you got to open up a photo. So let's go over here to File and Open. And again, this is online, so I imagine this would work with many devices, but I know it works well with desktops that have the photographs right there where you can access them. So I'm going to click Open, and I already made a little folder here that we can work with. And let's do this one. This is an old film photo that I shot years ago, and it could use a little touching up. Okay, so you have my waterfall. It was a very cold day. The river had started to freeze over. I did this pretty late at night and did a long exposure, and it was cold, very cold. Okay, so few things that I'd like to do to this picture. First off, let's just zoom in a little bit here so you can see it closer. Well, that'll have to do. And one thing that you might want to do, and I just want to show you a few simple things, you might want to crop your image. So right here, I have the crop tool. If you hover over it, it does say that. There it is. And if I click it, what it'll do is allow me to draw a box around my image. And then I can rotate it. Oop, that's not quite like Photoshop. And then I can make it a little bit smaller. Maybe like this. Rotate it back a little bit. Yeah, that's about right. And then if I like it, I can go ahead and hit confirm, or you can hit enter. There we go. That looks a little bit better. Something else that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to probably adjust the contrast and the color. And again, a lot of that is found right up in here. And most of it is going to be under adjustments. Now, you can try some of these auto things right here. But if you go to adjustments, you can adjust things like the brightness and contrast. Very simple way to do it, which is nice. So I can like brighten the whole picture, darken the whole picture, boost the contrast to reduce the contrast. Let me undo that though. And we'll zoom in a little bit closer here just so you can really see like what I'm doing. Let's go back into image and show you some of the other ones. A more advanced way to handle contrast is levels. So if we click on this, it's kind of neat because it breaks your image down into a histogram, or like almost like a value scale. So you're seeing the darker values here and the lighter values here. If I drag this over, it's going to start to brighten the areas of the photo that are in the lighter areas. If I drag this over, it's going to start darkening the dark values. And then I can move this middle bar here to adjust the midtones. Don't actually want to do that, so I'm going to click this off. And then the last one I want to show you in adjustments that I think is really cool is curves. And curves is a lot like levels, but it gives you even more control over your contrast. So these are like really helpful things to familiarize yourself with. Again, you can see your photograph broken up into like a value scale. A lot of times we'll call that a histogram. Sometimes you'll see this in your digital cameras as well. And if I drag the bottom over, it's going to make my dark values darker if I drag the upper area here, it's going to make my light areas lighter. But then I can do some other things. I can start to play with the curve. I can start to play with the line. So I can actually adjust the midtones by dragging this up and down. And I can do it more specifically. Like maybe I want to darken some of those midtones. Maybe I want to lighten up some of the upper values. Maybe I want to reverse this curve and do some really weird things. There's a lot you can do with this, and it's really interesting. But I don't want to make that permanent, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. If you do make a mistake, let's say here I go into image and adjustments and I play with color. There's a few different ways of doing that. You've got color balance, and you also have hue saturation. This is probably the easier way to work with it. Now, this is not a color image, but I can still adjust the tones a little bit because even the scanner that I use can read a little bit of color. I don't think we're going to get much with the saturation. Well, I guess we did get a little bit with the saturation. So you can play with these things, and this will make more sense for a color image. But if I go ahead and say okay, and I'm like, oh shoot, I don't want it to look like this. This looks terrible. Then you can always go into edit and either undo, which that'll work kind of like one time, or I can go to step backward, which allows me to basically go back in time, and I can continue stepping backward. If you go to history, this is kind of neat because just like in Photoshop, it tracks all the things that you've done in your image. So you can kind of go back in time. I can go back forward to the mistake I had just made, or I can go back to my original thing that I did, which was cropping. Okay, I'm going to show you more advanced things in the next video, but I just wanted to get you started with some simple things that you can play with. I think this will really help with your daily uploads. If you want to crop in a little bit in your image, or if you want to adjust the contrast. One last thing that I wanted to show you in Photopea is how to rotate your image. Best way to do this is if you go into image and you go into transform, then you can rotate your image. So this is if you shot it vertically and maybe it's on its side and you're like, oh, how do I fix that? Well, that's how you do it. And then I can put that back again by going the other way. I can also flip the image, which is kind of neat. If I want to see it a different way, I'm going to undo that though, because I don't want to do that. And that's it. So those are a few basic tools for you to understand. First off, we had the crop tool, which is here. We talked a little bit about the selection or the move tool. That's good to know about. In image, a lot of what you need to know is right inside this window, and a lot of it's in adjustment. So this is like the contrast and the color. There's some other like fun things like photo filters and converting pictures to black and white, inverting photos, lots of things you can do in there. And then of course the transform, which allows you to rotate and flip images. Okay, so you have the picture the way you want it. And now we need to save it. So how do you do that? Well, one easy way is you go up into File, you export the image. So again, it's not really like a save because this is online. And then I'm going to go ahead and pick JPEG. Now you can pick some of these other formats, which are great, but JPEG is a nice all use kind of file. And there's some options in here. This is the format. These are the dimensions of the picture. And then I want my quality set up a bit higher. We're just going to go all the way up. There we go. And then when you have it the way you want it, we can go ahead and click save. And then it's going to prompt you to save that file. And I'm just going to say okay. And so now that file is saved to my computer and I'm good to go. So just wanted to walk you through some basic things, give you a little bit of a tour of Photopea, and then I'll be showing you some more things later. Have a wonderful